So you were saying that now you're trying to introduce some kind of, in a way, to professionalize the citizen media that you're working with, the journalists you're working with.
Yeah, and some sort of substitute media platform that people can really depend on to really know what's going on in Syria. I think the only way that we can do that is if we really take into consideration all the different aspects and all the different levels of society, even those that support the regime. As crazy as that sounds, I think we do have to relay what's happening on that side of the story. I think that's not being relayed, and I don't think that that's necessarily going to affect in a negative way the uprising or the aspirations of what people are calling for. I think it'll actually make it easier. I think that you can form some sort of understanding between both sides. This misunderstanding is actually, the margin is becoming much bigger day by day. So that is the goal, and a lot of people are optimistic about it, and we've just managed to get funding from some NGOs that want to support the project, and we hope to move to Syria once this is over and actually take part in building the country.
So the new part of the project that you're hoping will also involve voices that might not be convinced by the uprising yet, that's an internet radio station. And that's going to be, you're going to produce it here, but it's going to be broadcast?
Right. The radio station, the studio is going to be in Cairo in our office. It's going to be broadcasted online, which can then be relayed through satellite on satellite TVs. You also have radio stations that you can listen to, and then hopefully terrestrial FM. The FM issue is a bit complicated because you need a bordering country to actually work with you on it. We're working on it. I think it will take at least a month or two before it's possible for us to actually go terrestrial inside Syria. And I think that's the main goal. If we're able to do that, we can reach soldiers in the army, in the raging army. We can reach people easily without, their IPs being traced because they're on the internet. It's just a radio device that you turn on and listen to. We're very optimistic about doing this. We think that we can have a significant effect on the situation if we're able to reach all our goals.
And so, just in terms of filtering and relaying and helping people to record and upload clips of demonstrations and things that are happening, obviously clashes, attacks. You were saying before, I think, that it's also, you're aware of the difficulty of seeming too partial, of not being able to show entirely what's happening.
Right.
Is that right? So is that something that you're working with the...
I think for someone inside the country, someone in Homs, for example, under shelling, a relative just died, I think it's very, very hard to ask them to be neutral. I think they have to be convinced that being neutral is going to offer something positive. Given that when we say our side, I mean the uprising side, the revolutionists. Given our side, I think that we can consider them to be who want a democratic country, one that respects minorities, and equality. I think we're calling for this. I think we're the good side. So if we're calling for this, anything that we can contribute to in an equal way, in a democratic way, would be initially contributing to that. I think the government is the only side that should be using propaganda right now, that should be lying, that should be using state-controlled TV, radio stations and magazines to make that propaganda more extreme and more believable. I don't think we need to do that. I think at some stage maybe it was important because not a lot of people were taking part, not a lot of people understood what was happening, but now the country is taking part, everyone's taking part. And everyone who's decided that they want change, that they want to see some sort of democratic country that Assad isn't involved in, he's not the king of the country. I think they've done something in some way or another, whether it's protesting, whether it's helping, whether it's handing out donations. I think we've reached a point where we don't need to over-exaggerate. There was a need to over-exaggerate at some stage because you're up against a government that is willing to say anything to demolish what's happening. So
and the government also, basically from the very beginning, and continues to insist that everything that you see online is fake.
It's fake, precisely. And there are no such things, but there are a few protesters thanking God for rain. And that was one protest I took part in, where 20,000 people were in protest. And the government said that no, there was tens of people thanking God because it wasn't even raining. It was raining on the other side of the city, but the Syrian government didn't even know that. There was one saying that someone said that the Syrian government even lies about the weather. So you do have to stand up against that. We're at a stage where we don't need to. All we need to do now is really shed light on exactly what's happening. We have every right to be calling for a democratic country. We have every right to call for our rights, universal rights, as any human being should have. And I think that reflecting that in every manner, even in the resistance manner, where people will take up arms and fight for themselves, and wear bandanas and look like terrorists, whatever. These people are fighting for their rights. Instead of standing by the regime, shooting at civilians, these thugs, if the government wants to call them thugs, have decided to now stand by the people and fight against the government. So it's justifiable on my part, and I think we should reflect it in every way possible.
And you feel at this stage slightly, perhaps more optimistic than some other people might, looking at the situation. Why is that?
I was just in Syria for 2 days. I wasn't as optimistic before going in. I saw something that I'm very optimistic about. I saw organised FSA. I thought it wasn't there. I saw free traffic police with whistles, and it was amazing. I don't think it's possible I didn't think it was possible to put something like that together when you're basically occupied. You're occupied. At any moment, shelling can begin. At any moment, they could come storming and arresting everyone, killing people. We've seen what happened in Homier, we've seen what happened in Lokhber, massacres of women and children. But still, they've set up a country in a country where they say, here it's free, here you can say what you want, here you can be democratic. And I lived that for 48 hours, and I stayed with women and children who inspired me. I'm very optimistic. I saw the Syria that I want to see in the future, without the shelling.
And the regime has said, as you mentioned the massacre in Hula, among other things, that what's happening is just purely a sectarian uprising, a sectarian war, and blaming extremists, Sunni terrorists. So you don't have concerns about sectarianism?
I have concerns about sectarianism, definitely, only because the propaganda is there, and it's becoming a reality because the propaganda is so extreme. I think a lot of different sides want sectarianism in Syria. I don't think it's just the Syrian government, but it definitely is the Syrian government. The Syrian government has used the expression sectarian strife since the very beginning, even when it was just demonstrations that had no signs of sectarianism whatsoever. In fact, the very first demonstrations, I know Alawites, Ismailis and Christians, I know more Ismailis, more minorities that took part in the demonstrations than Sunnis. So it was really absurd that the government would say that there was fear of sectarian strife, but it was obvious that was the road they chose, and they began with the sectarian propaganda. They used it on state TV, as did a lot of not Western channels. Western channels did sort of reflect that sectarian strife was a problem, and then you had the Saudi and Qatari channels, which we have to be honest, seem to not have anything against a sectarian problem in Syria. And we do have a problem with it. We do. We're going to be affected. It's the people that are going to be affected. And it's over-exaggerated. I didn't see it as much as I've heard it outside the country. I was inside where it was more extreme, where there was shelling, where there was killings. The saying that I heard was, get caught by a Sunni and don't get caught by an Alawite and don't get caught by a Sunni. And I was like, what do you mean? They said that an Alawite will let you off, a Sunni won't.
These are the extremists among the uprising.
And this was, it was definitely a shock to me. I knew it was over-exaggerated, but I didn't know it was to this extent. people do not want to kill the Alawites. Alawites are not the only part of the country taking part in the crackdown. It's a lie, it's not true. It's what the government wants. The government will make it look like soldiers, only the Alawite soldiers are beating people because it's only the Alawite soldiers that are allowed to have the cameras. And then people see it on TV, Sunnis see it, and Sunnis say, look, they're killing us because we're Sunnis. It grows that friction, it becomes a real problem. I think the longer the situation goes on, the more it becomes a reality. And it's why we want this over quickly. It's why some people would prefer an intervention, because they say you don't know what could possibly happen if it does become a sectarian war. I'm against the intervention. I think we can do it on our own. I just think that we need some sort of real moral and logistical support from outside the country.
So you do think that support for the Free Syrian Army, the FSA, is important?
It can be done in an organised manner. The FSA was not established in a very organised way. It's becoming more organised. If I could quickly pass a scenario, if you have funding coming for different groups in the FSA from all different directions, it becomes a mess. If some sort of military council is set up that corresponds to a political council, like let's say the SNC, the Syrian National Council, and they have the amount of funding that they need, then they can throw authority on the Syrian street, especially the militants. They just need that funding, but without the agenda. We saw some sort of funding, but there was an agenda attached to it, and that's why it was refused, and that's why the Syrian people refused it. Even if the Syrian National Council accepted it, we refused it. Funding without an agenda. I think I would give Assad 2 weeks if that was